Welcome back to Desk Careers. I'm so excited to bring another incredible guest. Today, we are meeting with Brandon Parker, who is the Senior Communications Manager at NFL Players Association. I'm so excited to have you with me today, Brandon. Welcome to Desk Careers.
Thank you for having me, Maria. I appreciate it.
I know that students are always really curious about what they can do with their passion for sport. And I think what's very interesting about you, Brandon, is that you went down a very academic path, and yet you have found yourself in a very sports driven industry, but still using the skills of your academia from way back when. And I really want to get to understand a little bit more about how you made those choices. But before we get into those details, let's take you back in time to when you were in high school. Do you remember thinking about your future and thinking about what you wanted to do as you were getting closer to graduation?
Yeah. So that's some time ago. I guess I'm not too old, but it was a while ago. Yeah, you kind of, as you're a high school senior, you're excited about the next step with college and in the future. And at that point, I knew I'd always loved sports, but I knew, my dreams of being a professional athlete that wasn't going to happen. So like, what's the next best thing? So that's when I started getting interested in sports broadcasting because around that time with ESPN and Sports Center, that was really blowing up and at the forefront. So looking at people like the late great Stuart Scott, different people like that on TV, I was like, okay, that's what I want to do. But the interesting part was, a lot of people that are interested in those things do things like they work on the yearbook staff or they write for the school newspaper or different things to kind of prepare them for that. But I hadn't done any of that. So I knew the next phase in college was going to be kind of more of an exploration and learning. And thankfully it worked out that way. But there was, I didn't really know what it was going to look like. I just knew I wanted to be in the sports industry.
Wonderful. And were you an athlete in your secondary education? Were you on the football team and really athletic? When you mentioned that you understood that your sports career as a sports professional wasn't really gonna wasn't gonna come through for you, was that because you were heavily into sport?
Yeah, so I played basketball in high school. I love watching all kinds of sports. So basketball was the one I played in high school. But yeah, it's not like I was getting like Division 1 scholarship offers or anything like that. So that's again, you come to that crossroads of like, again, you love sports, but what does that look like outside of actually playing professionally? So. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed, that experience in high school, but I was fine with, leaving it there and moving on to the next thing.
And that's a big, I mean, we're kind of skirting around the emotional connection that we see with young people in sport, probably what you had as well, in that you're retelling the story. So anybody watching this right now who is a young person really passionate about sport, you're listening to Brandon and probably thinking, yeah, he probably wasn't as passionate as me. Brandon, do you remember your colleagues or your peers who were equally interested in the sport and that emotional attachment to really want to be in that sport, thinking about, I think it's almost like an identity crisis when a young person who's so connected to sport is then told, well, actually, if you're thinking about taking this professionally, you better really change your mind because it doesn't look like it's going to go down that path. How would you compare those feelings to, what you saw with your peers? Was it that you were more resilient to it, or was it that you were kind of you understood at a much younger age that, being that professional, it wasn't going to be the thing for you?
That's a good question. Yeah, everybody's different. I think, yeah, you do hear those stories and those narratives like only this many people make it. And it is a small percentage that make it to play in college sports and even smaller to play at the professional level. But Some of that, is driven from your parents and your family and what they tell you. Like my parents always were encouraging in terms of like keeping an open mind about you can do anything. So if I wanted to keep pursuing, playing athletically, I'm sure they would have supported that 100%. But they also let me know like there's more than one path, and you've got a lot of different gifts and talents. And I think they saw some of those things when I was younger in terms of like my writing ability, how much I enjoy talking about sports. So and as I've grown in this industry, and I tell people all the time, like, don't get so focused on just one thing, whether it be playing the sport or, being the glamorous broadcaster or the big time, writer talking about sports on camera. That's great and all, but there's a lot of other people that go into that formula that make it happen. Like you could be a producer, you could be behind the camera, you could be a script writer, just so many different things that keep you close to sports, but also hone some of the other gifts and skills that maybe you didn't think about, that you could put to use in that industry. So yeah, and I think probably there were, some of my friends who did go on to play in college and even at the professional level, you know, they probably did show more potential than I did. And then because of that, their drive might have been a little bit stronger in terms of putting more training into it, like working personally with a trainer or different things like that. So I think around that time in high school, you kind of have a realistic sense of what that next step looks like. And, not to say that you shouldn't keep pushing or pursuing your dreams despite what other people say. But I think for me, just taking a step back and looking at everything, I think I've realized, looking at sports journalism and that world was the next best step for me.
What were some of the stereotypes that you can remember when you were a younger teenager and you were in sport and then realizing, hey, I can use my skill for writing and continue down that sports path? Can you remember any of the stereotypes that you had to kind of overcome when you were telling people about the career path that you were thinking about?
I think that the biggest one for me, and it's not so much a stereotype because it was kind of reality and still is in some ways, in terms of like there weren't you see more people that look like me in terms of a black man playing the sport versus talking about it or writing about it. So there are only so many people to kind of look up to and try to, connect with them or emulate their path or try to, take wisdom from them. So I mentioned the one that I really looked up to was Stuart Scott. Another one was Mike Wilbon, who used to write for the Washington Post, which is the paper I grew up reading, and he still does, a lot of great stuff on sports and on TV. So, but yeah, it's grown a lot, but at the time that was like early 2000s, 2002, 2003. There wasn't a whole lot, to look after. So you kind of fight through that and think, okay, I want to be the next person to kind of blaze that trail and inspire the next generation and also learn along the way. So I think that's the biggest thing. You can often get discouraged as a person of color when you don't really see a lot of representation out there. But I think that's growing, that's changing, and that helps, in terms of inspiring you to keep going.
And I really appreciate that you have opened up this conversation and took us in that direction, because I believe you're right. And that's why we do spotlight interviews, is to bring real life role models so that our youth can look up to people and find a connection to someone that they feel is like them or looks like them or sounds like them or even had the same aspirations as them. And
Mhm.
now that you are in the industry, I know that you're right. I mean, the industry that you're in that sports industry, it is a very competitive industry. And then you've chosen to be a journalist as well, which is another very challenging industry to be in, very competitive. What have you learned that you wish as a younger teenager you could have prepared yourself for? Because I think young people, when they think about their future careers, they're not really thinking about it in a holistic fashion. They're kind of only thinking about the job title and the university degree they think they need to take in order to do that job. But we know that our lifestyle is shaped by our career experiences. And I think sometimes secondary school or high school doesn't really prepare young people for that holistic lifestyle that they're walking into. So now that you're living it, now that you're, I would say, probably at the peak of where you probably never thought you would even achieve. And that is with complete respect. I think sometimes when we climb milestones in our careers and we look back and think, wow, I've come through such a distance. I can't wait to see where else I'll go. But I think sometimes when we do that, young people look up to us or look up to role models like you, Brandon, and think, how do I go from secondary school? I want to do Brandon's job, but it doesn't work that way. You have to climb those milestones. So going back, what do you wish you could have been prepared for or prepared yourself for, so that some of those obstacles that you faced you might have been a little more prepared for?
Yeah, and that's a great point. I think a few things. The biggest one is like the path that you take is your own path, and it's not always linear. Because in the social media world with Facebook and Instagram and all those things, it's easy to look at what your peers are doing and compare yourself and to say, oh, this person made it to this role, this job when they were only 25, or, I'm here, but this person is there, and everything looks glamorous on social media. So it's easy to get caught up in that rat race and thinking that, you're behind or you're doing something wrong because your peers or somebody you look up to had their certain path and it's not working out that exact way. So yeah, I went through that a lot. Just again, looking at the people that I looked up to, like Michael Wilbon became a columnist at a really young age, and he was covering different things, or Stuart Scott was there, or even just again looking at my peers, some of them landed, big time jobs right out of college. So you kind of grapple and battle with that. And specifically for me, my first job after grad school was in this small town called Beaufort, South Carolina. Most people, even here, haven't really heard about it. But when I was there and covering high schools and like youth sports and things that I honestly didn't really want to do because it's not very glamorous, and you're thinking about professional sports and being in those locker rooms. So you're thinking in your head, like, how am I going to move from here to the ESPNs or the big places like that? But I had to realize, don't get so focused on the next step that you lose sight of how this current role and step is going to help shape you and prepare you for what that next step is. So once I finally stopped looking ahead so much and just focus on the now and doing my best where I was, that helped me grow and get to where I needed to be, so that I could be prepared and more marketable in terms of when I was trying to make that next step for those other jobs. So it took a while, and you still sometimes have to remind yourself of that, because again, it's easy to get caught up on social media and things like that. But yeah, just kind of focusing on doing your best where you are, and God will take care of the rest, and it'll work out. So that's kind of the biggest thing I had to learn, and thankfully it has worked out where I continue to progress and meet new people along the way. Another piece of advice that was helpful for me, that somebody told me, was make friends before you need them. And what that means is, you're going to meet a lot of people along the way. People always talk about networking and connecting with people, reaching out to people, and that's important. That's great. But also understanding, like, as you go along, whether it be if you're covering a game or you meet somebody, and it can be, it could be the intern to the CEO, always, put value into those connections and those conversations, because you never know where that person's going to end up later, the industry is small, even though, like you said, it's really competitive. It's a small circle. So you never know what a chance encounter can do. So if you're always, only reaching out to people when you need something, that's fine sometimes, and it happens, but it's better if you meet somebody and you continue to build that, relationship connection, reach out every now and then, like, hey, how things going? So when you do need that person, or if they need you, it's just a continuation of that conversation versus like you only hear from that person, they only hear from you when you need something. So when things are genuine, and you just understand that this is a relationship and a networking business, that can serve you well as well. And I enjoy just getting to know people as well. So I like that part of the industry, and doing those things. But I think, yeah, just kind of trusting the process and understanding, like you said, when you're young, in that, all you can see is like in that. So if you understand that it's a long game, there's a bigger picture, and it might not happen at a certain age or the age that you thought, but that doesn't mean that, you give up. It could happen when you're 40, it could happen when you're 50. It's never too late, but just continue to keep trusting your process, and what God has for you, and it's going to be okay.
Such great advice. Let's go into your education. You started with a bachelor's in journalism and mass communication, and then you went on to do a master's in reporting and writing. Is that the minimum requirement to do the role that you are doing today? Is a degree really vital to do your role, or can a young person grow in the system and still make it to where you are today without having a university degree?
I mean, it's definitely possible, but I definitely encourage anybody to get that college experience, because it helps not only in terms of, your schooling, because like you said earlier, college is a little bit more practical in terms of having courses and experiences that can actually apply to once you become an adult, and have that real world experience. So uh, UNC Chapel Hill, the University of North Carolina, was great for me in terms of the classes were great, but also offered me a chance to, excuse me, to write for the school newspaper, which, I always say there's no better substitute than actually doing it and getting that practical experience. So that helped me because, like I said, I never really had those things in high school, and just meeting people and internships. So, I wouldn't say it's required, because there's a number of people in the industry who either didn't get their undergrad degree or finish it, or go to the big name school, and they're doing just great. But I would obviously strongly recommend it. In terms of the master's degree, I'd say that's not necessary per se. I mean, I think it's becoming more common for people to get a master's degree. So, if you do go that route and go to grad school, definitely go to one that you feel like will enhance your skill set, which I feel like Northwestern really did. And again, made it really practical as opposed to just sitting in the classroom, having people talk at you. In some industries, it doesn't really apply to the journalism industry, but in a lot of industries like business, if you get your master's degree, that can make you more marketable in terms of your salary. Like if you have a master's degree and another person doesn't, there's a good chance that you might make more money than them, but it doesn't really apply like that in journalism. The reason big reason I got my graduate degree is because I wanted to teach a college course on sports reporting or sports writing, because I took a class at University of North Carolina that was just life changing for me, and really helped me and find my voice as a writer and along my path. So I want to have that same impact on other people, and thankfully it has worked out where I'm an adjunct professor at George Mason University and teach a sports reporting and writing class. So yeah, I mean, you want to be very thoughtful and deliberate in the steps that you make, but it's not, no, it's not a requirement, but it helps. It helps.
It sounds to me like everything you did had an intention behind it, a very clear,
Mhm.
conscious intention, which is something that I'm often reminding young people, especially when they're coming in and feeling really stressed about what to do next. I will remind them that it's not about what to do next. It's about what it is that you want to be doing in terms of the occupation that you choose to do, and then looking backwards and saying, well, what could I do that's going to make me more competitive? Would you say that that was a conscious process for you? Were you consciously doing that? Or now that you look back, you think, yeah, that was an unconscious process, but actually it was really effective?
It's a little bit of both. Like I think, any decision you make, you want to weigh the pros and cons. So like, when you're picking a college, you're trying to weigh what this one will give you versus another one. Or going to grad school, there's a lot of people that are like, why are you going to grad school? Because again, it's not gonna help you make any more money in sports journalism. And you already got a pretty good education at UNC, so why do that again? So you kind of have to see through those things and take a leap of faith, and I'm glad I did that in that situation. But there's also, you have to also leave room for times when you're gonna have experiences that maybe you feel like aren't as fulfilling or helpful, but like you said, when you look back you can see how it kind of contributed to that. And I think sometimes that contribution can be, you learn what you don't want to do. So there are a few internships that I had where I was like, this is okay, but I don't think I want to do this like long term or do this every day. And that's fine, because I think that's all part of that learning experience with college. And that's why, again, I strongly recommend going, because it gives you kind of that cushion and that learning experience to figure out what you do and don't want. And that apply to jobs too. Like most people, especially in our generation, most people only stay on jobs for so long. You don't necessarily see in our parents' generation where they might have stayed on a job for like 20, 30 years. And that's fine if you find a place that you really love and like. But, sometimes you're going to have different experiences that are great and some not so great. But what can you learn from those? How can it contribute to you learning how to, navigate your next step, and again, seeing the bigger picture? So, yeah, I mean, some of it, it was conscious, but some of it I didn't really understand how helpful it was or what lesson to take from it until kind of looking back a few years later.
So great. Let's go through some of your work experiences, if that's okay with you.
Hmm.
I want to start right at that first internship you did. Can you remember walking into that internship and kind of looking around and saying, wow, this is it. Like this is what I am learning about, and this is what I'm experiencing right now. Can you remember the experience for yourself, and what you think was the greatest learning now that you can look back at it?
Well, it's fun you asked that, because I'd say I probably look at my first two internships, because the very first one, was after my freshman year in college, and I interned at this place called Cox Communications, and at the time they were like the major cable company, locally in Northern Virginia, and they had different, yes, they specialized in that, but they had their own public relations department. So that's why I interned at. And at the time, I was like, this is cool. I'm gonna be starting my first internship and get that real experience. But then as I was doing more stuff, I had one of those experiences where I'm like, I don't know if this is what I really want to do. I just felt like it wasn't as busy as I wanted it to be. Like just time kind of passed. You know how you're like on the job sometimes and the time passes slowly, and you feel like, well, that's a sign that you're not really having that much fun. So, you know, no knock to Cox Communications and the people there, because they were super helpful, did all they could to help me learn from that experience. But I was just like, yeah, I don't know. But I actually ended up doing 2 summers with them. The second time, it helped going into it, because I kind of could have a better understanding based on what I was learning in college and just seeing of being able to communicate. This is what I want to do more of. So the second time around, they had me work more closely with like their digital media department, and I got to do some different on-camera experiences, which is really cool. So Again, just always learning from things and taking away from things. And then the well, I guess my third year of internships, but the second different place because the first two again were at Cox Communications, and then the next one was at the Richmond Times Dispatch, and that was when I was their sports department intern. So that was my first real experience of like doing the sports journalism that I really wanted to do. And those were some of real cool experiences because you're being sent off to cover, those professional experiences in sports. So they had a minor league baseball team there, the Richmond Braves, which is actually the minor league team for the Atlanta Braves. Congratulations to them. They just won the World Series. So that was cool. I got to do like a arena league football. Just a lot of cool different experiences. So just like being on the job and just soaking it all up and taking chances and learning like that. Yeah, you do have some kind of like, wow, this is really cool moment. So I say all that to say like it was a little bit of both. Like you learn what you didn't like, you learn to, narrow your focus on, okay, this is what I really want to keep pursuing and doing. So that's why internships are great. That's the best thing that you can do as you're in school because it's gonna give you that full scope and picture that maybe the classroom won't.
Amazing. I'm going to drop some names now. We have ESPN and we have the Washington Post and your current role at the NFL Players Association. I know a young person watching this right now is going to be like, how did he land these company opportunities? Was it somebody he knew? Was it, based on his degree? What are some of your tips for anyone thinking about pursuing these types of opportunities at organizations such as the ones you've worked at?
Yeah, great question. And I sometimes look back at it myself and like, how did this all happen? Again, like I said, I always give credit to God, but yeah, I think the first big jump going from the place in Beaufort, South Carolina, small little place, to ESPN, that happened. Like I said, one, I started finally focusing on just doing my best where I was and understanding that the work would kind of speak for itself. So I still am a part of the National Association of Black Journalists. So every year they have an annual convention where they do different workshops and a lot of people are there and you can network, and also they have a job fair. So in between the year before I joined ESPN, just talking to different people. Of course, everybody's at the ESPN, table and booth. But I met some people and they were like, "Oh yeah, I'll keep your stuff on file." And of course, you hear that all the time. But I think it was the other people that I networked with and understanding again, this industry is very small. Everybody's well connected. You never know what conversations happen. So it just kind of led to me staying in touch with them and asking them like, do you have any openings? Because they said, oh, something might open up here. So just constantly staying in touch, showing them my work that I was doing. Those are the things that people like to see, like not being a nuisance, but just like, showing that you're passionate and that you're somewhat aggressive in that sense. So that when something did open up, I was a strong candidate. One, because I had work to show for my ability to do the job, but also two, I had stayed in touch with those people. And like I said, it just was an ongoing conversation that just continued through the interview process. So, I think, and just trying to be a good person. I think people underestimate that because, people, like you said, it's so competitive. People feel like they have to undercut people or cut corners, or you can't be friends with this person because they're your competition. But I think I've always gone back to like just being a good person, because you can find anybody, just about anybody, to do the work and the skills, but like do the people that you're around, do they enjoy working with you? Because you can be the greatest worker, but if you get on everybody's nerves, if you don't show the right fundamentals and skills, if you're hard to work with, it's going to be hard for you to continue to ascend, because you're going to build that reputation of, yeah, he's a great worker, but I don't really like being around him or working with him, or he just takes himself too seriously sometimes. So just being a good person and treating everybody the same, and again, knowing there's value in every conversation, I think that goes a long way. And I know with my current role, because if you look at my resume, most of my experience is in sports journalism and writing, whereas my current role is more sided on the communications, a little bit of public relations, going back to what I was doing in my first internship. And again, all things, come together full circle. But my managers always tell me now, like, you weren't the most qualified person for the job in terms of like your experience in communications and public relations, because you didn't really have a whole lot. But we knew that you were good at building relationships, and you were just came off as a good, genuine person in the interview. And we can work with that, and it's worked out that way. So again, knowing those two things in terms of building relationships and just being a good person, I think can take you a long way.
Such wonderful things to remember. I think it's a what you describe are really tips for life and not just in our career. Brandon, what's it like to work for the NFPL Association? I mean, you're surrounded by these incredible professionals and you're able to enjoy the opportunities that come with being in this industry. But what is it that we don't see that young people need to prepare themselves for if they're thinking about a career such as yours?
Yeah, so I really like what I do now, because I feel like it's different in a sense. Again, I love what I did in sports journalism, but it's kind of different in a sense because you feel like you're working for a larger purpose when you're with a union or a sports union, because our job is to serve the players. And I think at the basic level, yes, everybody looks at them as athletes and entertainers, but at the very basic level, they are workers who go to their job every day, just like me and you. So that's our job as a union, to protect their interests and their wages and hours and working conditions, just like anybody else on the job. But also trying to tell their stories, trying to connect them with different media people that can tell about their interests off the field, because they're more than just the sport that they play. So we're big, especially with football, where most of the time they're wearing a helmet, so people don't really see their faces or get to know them. Maybe like you do like a basketball player or a baseball player, that you see their face all the time. So how can we tell their stories? How can we promote those things in the media? But also, we have a lot of programs and resources that we offer to players, whether it be continuing education if they want to finish their degree. We have an externship program where during the off season we set up players who are interested with uh, different industries, so they could work in sports media, they could work in business, they could work in Capitol Hill and politics, whatever might interest them, so that they're busy, their schedules are so busy, they don't really get the chance sometimes to do those internships or other things that we get to do, so that they can be prepared for that next step of their career, because football doesn't last forever, and most of these guys are retiring in their 20s and 30s, when a lot of us are just getting started with our careers. So it can be a scary place to be an athlete, but I think understanding all those things and seeing them as more than just the sport that they play, I think it helps bring perspective on life, and that these guys are just like me and you. They go to their job every day, they want to do their best, they want to succeed, they have some of the same fears that we have. So what can we do as a union to help them through that? And I think even that helped me, before coming into this, being a sports journalist, like it's easy to, when you're interviewing like the LeBron Jameses of the world, like to kind of have that awe factor, like, wow, this is LeBron James right here, and you want to treat him like he's a god, but it's just like he's just a normal person, just like anybody else. And I found when you treat athletes, entertainers just like normal people, most of them respond to that, because they're so used to people just treating them like they're entertainers or pieces of meat. Like it breaks down that barrier, because they're like, oh, you see me for who I am, versus just what I can do for you or what entertainment I can bring. So getting to know players, and people on that level is really cool. And I think that again, I keep going back to it. It helps in terms of those people to people relationships. How you deal with people can go a long way.
Now that you are on, at the peak of what you're doing and still connecting to the industry that you're so interested in, does it make more sense that you didn't become the player? Are you now looking back and saying, actually, I can't imagine having been the player now because I'm really enjoying what I do in the moment?
Uh, yeah, I mean, I probably think about it more like, what if you had put a little bit more time and effort into being a professional athlete? Because I think my mind was already kind of onto sports journalism and the next thing. So I think the way things have worked out are thankfully mostly how I had planned or envisioned it. So it's probably more so for me the opposite, especially the closer you are to working in sports and just seeing how things work. Like, what would it be like if I was that athlete? So, um, like I said, everything happens for a reason, but I think more so my thoughts are like, what if you had, spent more time practicing or doing those things? So I think, make no mistake about it, I wasn't like some superstar heavily recruited player in high school. So again, I probably it was probably my junior year where I more so made the decision that, okay, I'm gonna start focusing on the sports journalism side of things. But again, you never know, because there are plenty of I hear stories now of like professional athletes who like just kind of skyrocketed their senior year in high school and they didn't really see it coming. So it's like that what if for me, like, well, what if I had maybe changed my mindset differently? But yeah, I don't have any regrets because I definitely love what I do. And it's put me in a lot of those same experiences that I wanted to be in and could have as a professional athlete. So it's worked out.
Fantastic. And there you are right at the front of a classroom. What does that feel like, being the instructor now and teaching what you love to do so much?
Yeah, so that's a rewarding experience, and I definitely don't take it lightly, because that's the next generation of people that are coming up, and I think uh, teaching where I do it at George Mason is interesting because as a different from my experience at UNC Chapel Hill and at Northwestern, they don't have a journalism school or department, so a lot of those kids that are interested in going on a similar path that I have, they don't necessarily have the classes or like the track that I did in college. So when they take this, when the students that walk into my class, I try to really get a sense of what they want to do, what goals they have, so that I can really cater that class towards meeting those things. So this experience can make up for maybe what they're missing and not having that journalism track in George Mason. So I try to keep things really practical. Like I bring in some guest speakers in terms of like different sports journalists or athletes that I've met, so they can just hear from them directly, what it's like, and it's not always me talking. I'm not big on lecturing. I try to keep things, active and practical. So I'll have them go out and cover events, like go to the George Mason basketball game and actually sit on the press media row and cover it, or go to a Washington Wizards game and cover that. So again, the best teacher is actually doing it, and them taking that experience, and then they can ask me questions of, well, how do I approach this, or how do I learn from that? And yeah, grades are mixed into that, but I don't want that to be the focus. I want them to take away actual practical things that they can use for themselves down the line. So it's really cool. I enjoy it.
Fantastic. Brandon, I can keep asking you question after question, but I'm very conscious of your time and that you're just starting your day. It's been such a pleasure talking with you, and I really appreciate all of the insights you've offered us. One last tip that you can offer an aspiring journalist, an aspiring sports writer or sports reporter, what do you really want them to take away from your life experiences?
I just say, always keep learning and growing and never think that you've figured it out or reached the peak because as long as you're here, there's always a purpose and things that you could be learning. Like if you asked me 10 years ago if I would be where I'm at now in terms of at the NFLPA in communications, not doing as much sports writing or sports journalism, I'd probably look at you crazy like, no way. But, it's evolving and learning and growing and also keeping perspective on, what's important because I feel like this job has given me more of a work-life balance where I can enjoy my family a little bit more as well. So, always just keeping things in perspective, having fun along the way, always learning along the way. And like we talked about before, just trusting the process and seeing the bigger picture. It'll all work out.
Thank you so much, Brandon. Great advice. And that brings us to the end of another incredible conversation. Today, we were speaking with Brandon Parker, who is the Senior Communications Manager at NFL Players Association. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and we will see you at our next Desk Careers Digital Spotlight.